This is the ABQ Business Podcast with your host, Jason Rigby. Each week we'll interview visionary business leaders to inspire the creative power and spirit that's in every entrepreneur. Discussing strengths, weaknesses, strategies, systems, and the problems we can all solve together for a new future for local small business.
Really excited today. I've got an awesome guest. We're going to talk about thought leadership. We're going to get a little bit into some team building. I have a 20-year technology veteran. Sean Campbell is the CEO of Cascade Insights, a competitive intelligence market research firm for B2B technology companies. He's a popular speaker. He's discussed B2B competitive intelligence at over 250 events around the globe. He's also lectured at MIT Sloan Management School and presented Worldwide Student Competitive Intelligence Professionals Conference and shared his knowledge at many others. Sean's written 3 books and 2 ebooks, and most recently, the 6th edition of Going Beyond Google. He hosts a popular B2B Revealed podcast, now with more than 100 episodes on mythology, B2B tech, and interviews with thought leaders. Sean, thanks for being on the ABQ Business Podcast.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me on.
One of the things that I look at when I see Cascade Insights and you think B2B, and I know we'll get into some leadership, but the landscape has changed so much in B2B, especially what happened, March 2020. What are some of the things that you're seeing when you're speaking to company leaders, when you're speaking to thought leaders about how they're interacting, and the Zoom calls and different things like that? How are we communicating? Because it used to be you would just fly somewhere, drive somewhere, and then have that face to face. How are you seeing it now when you're dealing with business leaders?
Yeah. Well, one slightly odd thing at the start, there's so much negativity is a good word, but maybe not a perfect word for kind of how folks look back at 2020, right? I remember somebody even sent me something 7 days into 2021 when, those horrible events happened at the Capitol. And I say that apolitically. I don't think anybody wanted that to happen, right?
Right.
They said my 7-day return policy on 2021 is expired. I'd like to send it back, which I thought was great. And, but all that negativity though, we got to figure out like what did we learn from 2020? And one just interesting point, because you mentioned the Zoom calls. One of the things I've been saying to a lot of business leaders is we all became better writers. We had to,
Yeah.
think about it. Like you got to take a big company. The guy who used to bend the ear of your boss and grab him as they were walking from coffee every day, and you're like, I never get there in time, right? I can't make that meeting happen. It all got dumbed down to who can write the best, right? I mean, and some people, and I said this to one of our clients, and he said, you're right. He says, I have realized some of my colleagues are pretty dumb and can't write. I said, well, that's maybe not what I meant to say, but yeah, that's probably accurate, right? So there's that, and a corollary to that is, I think companies, and I'm thinking predominantly about the companies that are services firms like us, who. And we're 25 employees if folks are looking for a benchmark, right? And we invested heavily in marketing a number of years ago, a lot of thought leadership activities, a lot of just, bare metal SEO, pay-per-click kind of stuff, and what I think are some fairly interesting ways to market. But all that to say, we saw a really good 2020. I mean, we had a horrible Q2 like everybody did.
Right.
But after that, we had a really good rest of the year. And I attribute it to kind of a very simple thing. There were a lot of people in our lane, a lot of big tech companies, a lot of people that were used to having somebody in the building flying to have a meeting, like you alluded to, right? So they had their favorite nation vendor that they had coffee with and whatever. All that stopped. And so what happened is those people decided to go look out, and everybody uses Google as their therapist, right? And so they went out and said, where's a better vendor? And the ones that had great marketing were the ones that were going to get found. And the reason, not that having great marketing is unique, but in the services industry, it is kind of unique.
Right.
I mean, most services firms below X size have really horrific marketing. it as we used to say even about ourselves years ago, our website existed to not disqualify us, right? That was the extent of what our marketing was years and years ago. And that worked when you could go meet everybody and talk to everybody and shake hands and, all the stuff that we can't do now. And so it's kind of an interesting blessing in a way. We grew at the end of the year. I mean, I'm just talking about from a business standpoint. COVID was not a blessing for anyone, but like we felt blessed that we got to grow. And I think that's something you got to be thankful for at the end of the day. Plus, we all became better writers, which doesn't hurt too. So
yeah, I've talked to quite a bit of business leaders, that were in the tech space, and they're like, to be honest, Jason, we had an amazing 2020. And 2021 is looking like it's going to be pretty good. And you almost, with everything that's going on, it's like, you almost don't want to say that because it's kind of one of those things where it's just like, oh, everybody, you look at that mom and pop's, grocery store or that restaurant, and you see the struggle that's going on. And that's something, that I've had to talk to employees about. It's like, just this feeling of guilt, or this feeling of not, per se, saying, well, I'm getting a paycheck every week, and so we've kind of embraced like helping not-for-profits and doing different like that, and to try to get our culture back to where there's this, because, and I don't know how it was for you, but as being a leader, but there was this uncertainty about COVID.
Oh, absolutely. In Q2, we watched daily just stuff evaporate from the pipe. I mean, there was hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of deals, and eventually approached $1 million in deals that just disappeared. And as I explained to my business partner, we were kind of reflecting on it just actually the other day when I was walking the dog. And I said, Scott, in retrospect, it was kind of like flying a plane where the engines just popped off. There was no ability to correct anything, right? This wasn't a survivable event. And then, to your point, and this is the blessing that we're thankful for, because we aligned with tech so many years ago. About 90 days later, it was like the engines just popped back on the plane, like just magically. Like tech decided, this. And again, words are challenging here because there's so much tragedy going on. But it's clear technology sector did well, right? They turn around and they look at it and say, well, I guess in the strangest way, this is an opportunity for us because people need a lot of technology to work from home, and they need cloud services, and they need all this connectivity. And I mean, that's what we're in the business in, right? So we're going to go do that. But yeah, it was very scary. And I don't know if you want to spend time there, on that side, but I can tell you kind of some of the thought processes we went through back then and what we had to deal with. But in the end, like I said, 2020 turned out, once we got past that really horrible Q2, to be a reasonable year. And to your point, we all around here are very thankful for it, and we are very reflective of all the other industries that they're not benefiting from that, and everybody wants things to get back to normal so those folks can get back to normal too.
Yeah, and that's something, Sean, that you said that was so true. It's like out of your control. Like those engines pop off, and it's like, what do I do now? And you saw the companies, you saw where leadership played. Because I feel like as leaders, we were on cruise control in this little comfortable world that we were in for so long. Yeah, we had little struggles, and we were being good managers. But as far as being good leaders, it takes a crisis or something like this, for you to say, because I did that. I sat back and I said, I said, if I had to grade myself on a 1 to 10 right now, I think I'm at like a 4 in this process. I've got to start. And I started consuming leadership books and started reading. I was like, I've got employees that are depending on me in this process. What am I going to do? And so it kind of gave me a wake up call. And, as with any struggle or suffering or whatever it may be in our lives, and this seems how it is with you, and because I can see how your culture already is in your business, we've all persevered through it, and we're all better for it now, if that makes sense.
It does. But to your point, at times like that, I think of a quote I read in a book. I want to say it was the book Super Bosses. And if it wasn't the book Super Bosses is still a great book.
Mm-hmm.
So either way, if somebody files that one away, it's a good thing to do. But if I'm right, they interviewed one of the guys in the book and they said, "What's your secret to success?" And he said, "Disappointing people at a rate they will accept."
Mm.
And I think there are people who own businesses in good times when all they're doing is giving gifts
Yes.
that that they're great at. It's fantastic. But when you have to disappoint people at a rate they will accept and do it for an extended period of time, or as some people say, I mean, in the old days, the buck stops here and all that kind of stuff. But I just summarize it as the CEO's job is a lot of times just to say no, right?
Right.
And they they don't talk about that all the time in startup happy land, right? You know what I mean? Like they give you the impression that that doesn't exist, right? And to some degree, it's all about growth and failing fast and all this kind of stuff. But the reality is there's a lot of that. You have to be okay with that. And you have to have the mental discipline to continue to do that when times are hard. And you also have to have the diplomacy to do those things with your team when they don't really want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
A similar thing I would say is like culture building, right? I think a lot of culture building in companies is a gift giving exercise. I've said this for years. Like, how big can we make the company cafeteria? Like, how big can we make the benefits plan? How big can we make the time off plan? And all those things are good, right? I like giving our employees benefits. I mean, we don't have a cafeteria, but you know what I mean? But like, it wouldn't make sense anyway, because we turned 100% virtual this year. So who needs that, right? But it's just a gift giving exercise is all it is. When really what it needs to be is an exercise where you really apprentice people and you grow them, right? And apprenticeship and teaching comes with telling people stuff they're doing wrong, right? And as well as stuff they're doing right. And I don't know. There's just a lot of things along those lines that I feel pretty passionate about. And on top of that, this isn't our first downturn. I mean, I saw the 2008 downturn up close in tech. We saw the dot-com bubble before that. And there's definitely some things that I think are truisms that help you survive those every time. A few of them I've already mentioned, but there's definitely stuff that helps you get through those easier, for sure.
Before we get into your expertise on marketing B2B, because I want to get into like customer buyer journey and stuff like that, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs will get a lot from this. You mentioned something just now about you've gone 100% virtual. And I'm talking to business leaders and they're trying to do maybe the hybrid model, or they're thinking about going 100% virtual. Is there some things that you could share that maybe you've learned, some struggles that maybe you went through, because you're seeing like, I know Pinterest did that and Twitter's done that and Snapchat's, saying that they're going to do that. What are some of the things that you're seeing with being 100% virtual?
Yeah. Well, interesting little piece of interesting history that listeners might find kind of just for context setting, good to hear. My first company that we grew and sold, we were 100% virtual, but that was 2000 to 2006, like long before it was cool to be virtual. It was such a different environment that literally back then, which sounds comical now, if you tried to sell somebody back then, like an Intel or Microsoft, which were two of our biggest clients, and we'd go and meet somebody new in one of those accounts, and they would say, "Where's your office?" Which was meant as a validating statement. Like It mattered where your office was, so did business cards, but I digress. Right. And so you would go and you would say, "I don't have one." And they would go, "Oh, must not be real, I guess." Right. And I'd say, "Well, you could pay for it." And there would always be this small pause after that. Right. They're like, "What did you just say?" And I'd say, "Well, that's what happens then, right? Like you pay for it. I don't take my another personal mortgage out on that thing, right? The business pays for that thing." So, and now we turn to now where it's uber cool to go virtual. The very first thing I would say, is a high degree of empathy for other positions in the company. It's very easy to get siloed when you are in your team and in your role, and you're just watching your team email you back and forth, and kind of forget what it's like to work another job in the company.
Right.
And I think we implicitly see more of that when we're in the building. And I think that's something that a lot of companies are going to have to work for. So I look for people with a reasonably high degree of empathy as employees. I also look for people that have just stellar communication skills, to the points I raised earlier, right? You have to be able to write effectively, and you also have to have good verbal communication. And another big thing is you can't be like a person who doesn't speak the truth to everybody else, right? There are certain people that will not really say that things are wrong. They feel like it's almost like overly polite, or there's something about it that like they just never tell anybody that anything's wrong. That's going to be a really hard person to work with virtually, because you need people to be very upfront when things aren't working. You don't have all the nonverbal cues that they look uncomfortable, right? I mean, even on video, it's not quite the same, right? And so I think there's definitely a lot of that. But I want to pause there. There's a lot of things I could tell you about working virtually that we found beneficial, but that's at least some top line things.
No, I love that, because what I'm seeing, and when I talk to business leaders, is employees are actively looking for jobs where they can work from home. So if you're in a business and you've taken and put everybody back into an office, you have a percentage of your employees that enjoyed being able to walk their dog at 2 p.m, or spend time with their children a little bit more, and they were happy to put them down to bed at night and then work 3 or 4 hours. So that flexibility has allowed a lot of people to have a enjoyment in life, and you're going to lose employees. I feel like companies that force this back to the office, when there's an option for them to be able to work at home. And then there's, and you mentioned something about being able to communicate clearly. I think that's huge. And then a trust factor too. I mean, you have to be able to entrust your employees. You shouldn't have them.
Well, yeah, and I think there's absolutely that. The other two big things I would say is that, piggybacking a little bit on what you said, is that I I think in a weird way we've gone back a couple hundred years, or maybe even more in a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the country was more agrarian, everybody worked at home. It was by
Yes, yeah, you're
definition,
right.
right?
Yes.
We all worked at home. We might have been an acre or two away, but we all worked at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm not saying I don't, I'm a big history buff. I'm also not somebody who believes like it was always better way back when. The truth is, you go far enough back, you're like, oh wow, okay, so I kind of like running water and a lot of other things, right? I mean, there's you can always play kind of a weird game with that. But one of the perspectives of history is kind of seeing like similar time periods and say, oh, well, there is a little bit of a comparison there. And yeah, that was hard work and everything, running the farm. But yeah, I think people are like, huh, so now that I'm set up, I kind of like that fact I can pick up Johnny and Mary from school while on a conference call. And I'm home at 4:30, and none of this is really, a problem. And then the other thing is, and this is something we've heard from a few different companies, it's a great boon for diversity goals.
Yeah.
And I want to be really specific about that, because, I live in Oregon, right? Anybody who's looked at Oregon is not demographically diverse. That's not a political statement. That's a census statement. Just go look at the census. Okay. I grew up in Chicago. Chicago is way more demographically diverse. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Comparatively. So, and each state will underrepresent and overrepresent in certain areas, right? That's for sure. But in the old days, you might hire from out of state, but you got to pay people to, move and all this other stuff. So there's
Mm-hmm.
always this temptation to hire like in your state, in your zip codes, right? Because the office is there. And I've had a few clients basically kind of, not in a private way, just like, hey, these are the public initiatives we're doing. They're like, hey, we can hit diversity goals like much easier now, right? Because we can reach out to regions of the country and the world where like populations that we felt were underrepresented in our company are heavily represented, right? And we can just go recruit there, and it doesn't really matter. Now you could argue they should have been doing that before, but that's for a different podcast, right? I'm just saying, like, they were doing what companies tend to do when they have an office in a locale. They hire locally, and then they're constrained by whatever demographics kind of exist locally.
Right.
And I think that's going to be another one of those odd silver linings, is these companies will become much more diverse. And, there also won't be this kind of, if I don't live on the corporate campus or live near the corporate campus, I'm not as close to decision making. So it also democratizes decision making a bit. And again, I, like everybody else, want COVID to go away. I'd like my vaccine tomorrow. There are a million things I'm excited and ready to do when this is gone. And, and that's just on a personal level, much less all the fatalities and all the challenges the world has had. Um, but I do think it's important we recognize the positive ways we might change out of this, and those are just a few additional ones, I think.
No, I love that, because as well as I do, when you look at Silicon Valley, just the way that it's imploded itself, by that, like begats like.
Oh,
And
100%.
and
100%. No, and let me
this.
chime on one quick thing there. Like, and anybody, I've said for years that I feel like I'm kind of a corporate cultural anthropologist, the corporate part being important in front of that, right? Like, if you go into a large company, and to protect the innocent here, I won't say, but everybody knows who the largest tech companies are, right? But, like, you go into one of those companies. Yes, historically, they've said they've had diversification goals, and I'm sure they're trying hard at that. But anybody who's been at one of those companies goes, so why in this company is everybody 40 and of this background? And why in this company is everybody under 30? And why over here does it look like this? And yeah, because it's exactly where you were headed, right? So I'll let you finish, but I was just going to say, like, it shouldn't be funny, but it is in the ironic sense that you have all this initiative behind it, but yet if you really, as an independent observer, wander into the cafeteria of a lot of these large companies, there isn't sometimes as much diversification as they might claim there is.
I know, yeah, and I always think of the Industrial Revolution, how we were, making these machines that turned around and stamped out these exact products, and then we got into quality control and assurance, and you can see that almost, you could take that same format and put these into these large companies, because they even have like their own lingo and glossary, and I mean, it's like you can tell where that person's from without even looking at their badge.
100%. No, my favorite story on that, and I'll be specific about this because one, it's a much older story, and at the same time, and in fairness, I'm not sure if Intel employees still do this exactly this day, but I remember, we'd went out to Intel. This was early in our entrepreneurial career, and we're saying, hey, when can we schedule a meeting, right? And the guy says, well, work week 22 or 24. And he flips over his badge and he's got this like work week chart. And I'm like, yeah. And, Intel, we love you. Well, kind of, sort of. I like my M1 Mac right now. I think they're kind of beating the pants off Intel with that, but that's for a different time. But I'm like, hey, I realize you're channeling that you're basically a tech company wrapped around a manufacturing plant by this whole work week thing, right? But you're right. There's all of that. You can pretty much just code up where somebody came from a little bit by the acronyms and kind of the jargon they use, like really, really quickly in a lot of cases.
And the reason I was saying that is because I think this is the most underrated aspect, the word diversity that you talked about. And we've always had it as an HR buzzword. But I've noticed this whenever even hiring somebody from a different country, and they feel like they have safety enough to be able to speak, their local culture a lot of times influences the way that their thought process is, and they will bring new insight into that team that you would have never even thought of. I've had interns say things to me that blew my mind, and I'm like, "You're right, I'm wrong. This is the direction that we need to head." So just because they were 19 years old and they've lived on their phone all their life. So it's one of those things where it's like diversity is the key. It's almost a competitive edge, I think now.
Well, 100%. And I think that's, I mean, yeah, and just as a small example of that on our side, the fact that we went virtual, we've had just increased diversity in our own employment base, right? Because we're based in Portland. We had an office in Portland. We talked about the demographics broadly speaking. Yes, we tried hard like everybody else to grow a diverse employee base, but the minute we went virtual, it made it a lot easier. And for companies that continue to do this, like you said, um, it it lets them tap into kind of entirely different viewpoints they wouldn't otherwise get. And I think that again is going to be one of the greatest things about this. I really like where we're headed. I mean, out of our new hires this year, I'd have to go pull up specific stats, but I want to say like 2/3 of them are out of state. And even that, just diversification alone of different states, different regions, different perspectives, outside of the inherent diversification of the individuals themselves, has been fantastic, in my opinion. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I want to get into, Sean, if you don't mind. Can you give a little bit of background on Cascade Insights? How you started it, kind of a little bit of history of that, and then let's step a little bit into B2B marketing.
yeah, absolutely. So Cascade Insights is my second company. My first company was Three Leaf Solutions. We grew and sold that over a period of 6 years. That's the one that I mentioned about, meeting the guy at Intel with his whole work week thing and that kind of stuff. And Cascade Insights does work for B2B technology companies. So we define that typically as cloud services, cloud hardware, that kind of thing. And our work for them involves doing market research projects. That's usually either qualitative or quantitative. So we'll go out and analyze the buyer's journey. We'll do buyer persona work. We'll look at market segmentation. We'll look at message testing, competitive landscape work, those kinds of things. And then we'll also turn around and activate that research by doing marketing projects for the same account that basically we did that, because we're in a pretty good position to say, hey, we did the message testing research for you. How about we rewrite your messaging framework, right? Or how about we go out and rewrite the messaging on your site, or do some content development for you, or kind of analyze how we can affect the buyer's journey for buyers coming to your site, and all those kinds of things. So that's who we are, and we're about 25 people. I used to say Portland based, but now we're not globally based, but we're at least US based. We got somebody in every time zone now, and yeah, this is my 21st year of owning a business. So, and I've got a great business partner, Scott Swigert, who's co-run this business with me and the one before.
That's awesome. So, like with Cascade Insights, what type of customer would you be, an ideal customer would you be looking for? If there's a business leader out there that's listening to this, and they may be actually interested in having a conversation on, whether it be, buyer's journey mapping or criteria research or whatever it may be, what type of, tech company are you guys looking at representing?
You are most likely a SaaS or platform as a service or an infrastructure as a service company. And if you don't know what those things means are, well, I guess you're not a fit. So, one way or the other. And so don't bother looking them up. And so if you're one of those three and you're at least over 50 to 100 people, anybody below that, you might not necessarily have the budget to commission a market research project. Never say never. Some smaller companies are VC backed, and there's all kinds of things that happen. But our sweet spot's going to be typically somebody larger than that. And we also have worked with a lot of the largest tech companies on the planet. Like AWS and Microsoft and Google and Intel and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, if you're a cloud play, we are happy to talk to you about research and marketing needs.
And I know I heard a statistic, a statistic the other day, and I don't know if it's right or not. It was on a predominant website. It was on Bloomberg, but they said that we did enough online shopping in 1 month that we had done in 8 years. In that beginning, late March, April, May. I know there's been a ton of online shopping. All these, companies have moved, online. But when you're looking in the B2B space, what are some of the things that you're seeing, with them, especially going, and I've heard this huge boom in data farms and all that, but what are you looking at whenever you have a customer come to you, a client come to you, and they're like, we need to change this. This is something that is got to happen. COVID caused this, and now it's 2021, and this is what we need to do. What's kind of the emergencies that you're seeing?
The journey. That's the biggest
Yes.
thing. The biggest thing is the journey because it all changed, right? I mean, they didn't have in-person sales. If you were a big company, you didn't have your conference anymore, at least in the same way, and conferences for larger companies were a multiple factor thing for them. They were a great way for them to get insights from the market because they weren't just presenting, they were actually, listening to everybody that would attend a big conference, right? What are the feedback? What are they thinking? All that kind of stuff. It was a way for them to present, kind of formally what they were going to offer the market, and we all know we don't listen to like a online conference with the same attention span of an in-person one, right? I mean, because you can multitask, right? So it's just a different engagement model. Um, on the flip side, you can attend more online conferences, which I don't want to go too far in the weeds in this, but we've suggested to some companies they kind of missed the boat on it. Like instead of uh, you know treating it like their physical conference just made virtual, they actually should have kind of reinvented it in a lot of ways. And we could talk about that if you want at some point, but like to really take advantage of the way this was going to get set up. And I think a lot of them missed the boat. Some of them have turned around on that. But yeah, it's really the journey. That's where they're concerned about how to access new customers. They're concerned about how their field sales force is going to go out and engage with current customers. And a little bit to the point I raised earlier, I think something that we're definitely going to see is you know the smaller competitor has has a little bit of a leg up that they didn't have because all of those in-person sales meetings aren't happening the same way, right? It's all
Mhm.
being driven through, the discovery of a new set of vendors. Like if you're an IT department and you want to go discover a new set of vendors, you're not having the same kinds of conversations in person you had with your favored nation vendors before. Yeah, you can have a Zoom call and you can talk, but the barrier to entry is a lot lower for all those other guys now,
Yes, exactly.
right? And so I think that's a huge thing that they're concerned about is kind of being eaten up by the ankle biters, right? To some degree. But that said, a lot of these tech companies are doing really, really, really well overall. So you got to keep that in the background of this discussion too.
Yeah, I want to. I had talked to a auto dealership group, and they had owned a bunch of dealerships, and I kind of want to get into this because I know it. I know you're specific with tech companies, but I think that this is a huge problem that we had, and I'd ask them if they've ever mapped out their buyer's journey. For each dealership, whether you have a Chevy dealership or a Ford or a Honda or Mazda, whatever it may be, and because each of them have a different buyer, and they were no. And I was like, I cannot believe that we have organizations out there, multi-million dollar organizations that's never done buyer journey mapping.
Yeah, it is. It is kind of stunning, and I think it gets at a slightly different problem, and we could spend a little time here or not if you want. But I think part of the problem why buyer's journey gets a little gapped is goes back to kind of not letting salespeople in B2B be a real part of the analysis process. Just to unpack that for a second, what I mean is, if we did a research project for almost anybody that we might work with, they'll schedule a kickoff, right? And it could be message testing, journey, personas, anything. Invariably, they will not invite somebody from sales. Marketing will show up and product will show up and leadership will show up, but sales won't be there. And we usually ask for sales to be there. And the reason we want sales there is, to use research lingo, in B2B sales, sales is conducting a never-ending qualitative research study. They're having months or years-long conversations with buyers, and these are typically meaningful conversations. I realize there's the stereotype of the B2B seller that just plays golf, but honestly, that doesn't really quite happen as much as it used to, and if it ever did. And so, for complex sales in B2B, your sellers are a really good input, right? And even when they're not quite so complex, like even the auto stuff, right? You mentioned, right? And I think you've got to bring those sellers into the fold and say, hey, what are you hearing about how customers came to us? What are you hearing about what they value? What are you hearing? And here's the flip side. And then I'll stop on this in case you don't want to spend too much more time on this. But on the seller side, they do themselves a very simple disservice. Sellers just talk in stories. And what they need to do is they need to get some quant from qual, to use the research lingo. They need to think, okay, when I go tell my boss or the marketers about a buyer's journey or what they sense is happening, they need to say, I talked to 10 customers last week who all said this, and here's their names or here's their organizations, right? Now let me tell you an individual story. And sellers just suck at that, right? They're all about the story, right? So that's one of the things I think. And the other thing I'd reason that buyer's journey doesn't happen is it's kind of a dirty secret that marketers don't like to go there, right? Marketers, and in fair disclosure, I'm not talking about my marketers because we coach them a little differently, and our team, right? Because some of our team listens to any show I get interviewed on, right? So I want to be careful who I'm talking about here. But marketers, they like to do brand. They like to deal with kind of the bigger picture projects, right? Let's reset all our messaging, right? Let's launch a new campaign, right? Buyer's journey is it's a little squishy and dangerous, right? How did people get here? Well, maybe they don't really look at any of the blog content you produced for years at all, right?
Right. Yes.
Maybe,
Secret cows.
do we really want those stats? I don't know if we want those stats, right? Now, does that mean that blog content was useless? Absolutely not. Maybe it helped you with your search ranks and your organic, and it floated all the ranks. And then that's, it's that kind of loose causality, right? What about social? Maybe none of your buyers ever looked at social ever. I know you've fallen in love with the Wendy's Twitter account and you're trying to emulate it, but like nobody uses it to buy from you, right? And so I think that's one of the problems, is that sometimes the insights that come out of that front end of the buyer's journey really rock the boat of the marketing team. And I'll be honest, on our side, I feel we do a really good job around here even with our own marketing. Like everybody's, we've all got good creative and intuitive ideas, but we marry those to what we actually are seeing from the buyer's journey. Like, I'll give you a very concrete example there, and then I'll stop and let you chime in. Like, in our case, we write what I think are really, really good blog posts, and we hear they're good blog posts, and people like reading them. On the other hand, our data shows that our leads tend to come into the site, hit a service page, and fairly quickly fill out the contact form. And they don't always transit through the blog posts. Now, there's two things to be said about that, and then I'll stop. One, that's an interesting indicator of our buyers' behavior. They would like to talk to us. These are typically larger companies or mid-markets. They don't want to waste a lot of time. They've identified that we're a vendor in the right lane. They like us. The next logical step is to just talk to a human being here, right? Given what we offer. On the flip side, is that blog content irrelevant? Absolutely not, because the site needs to be fresh. The blog content does that because then Google loves you, and then Google floats all your ranks. And plus, if you go to a given page where we rank for a certain term, it never hurts to have the service page and add and a couple blog posts, because somebody viewing the page goes, oh, I got to talk to these guys. They've got 4 links on this page, right? So that's where I go, like, and I think it's just a general thing about marketing, right? It's very hard to take the mix of creative, intuitive, and data-centric insights and kind of pile it all together in something that says, that's what my buyers are doing. Now I understand it. And that's why I think people don't like to go there sometimes. It's much more fun to go hang out and redesign the logo.
Yeah, our this is something that I've noticed, and maybe you can talk to this. Um, Marketers are getting marketed to so heavily now, and everybody's grabbing like, oh, I saw this ad, on Instagram, I read this, and now there's this new way to do marketing, and then they're pumping it back into their business. I mean, if I saw all the 100 of new ideas that are being that my guys are being marketed to, you look at it and it's like they've created a whole, probably $1 billion business just off of marketing to marketers.
Yeah, well, and the corollary there would be sellers, selling / marketing to sellers, right? You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
would say that the thing that preceded this was, this will date me a bit, but it's intentionally used, right? Back in the day, like guys like Jeremy Gitmer with his little red book of selling and
Right.
his whole thing, right? I mean, there was a whole industry that still exists and has grown, but it started about, 20 years ago that really exploded, were sellers selling to sellers all the techniques and ideas that sales teams needed to use, right? And we had all these different selling models, right? Miller Heiman and spin selling and customer centric selling and all this stuff, right?
Yeah, I've read
Just felt
those
like we
all.
haven't seen this before, right? Right,
Right.
exactly. Like, and I'm not saying those are all bad. I'm a big fan of the Challenger sale. I think the Challenger sale is great. Um, and I too pick and choose out of those models for what I want us to follow. But you're right. There's just this crazy volume of like marketers marketing to marketers and the content intelligentsia telling you like there's only one way to do this, right? And I
Right.
think you have to be really strong as a marketer and as a business leader to say, but hold on a minute, like, is anybody really doing that in our journey? Right? Journey, is that
Yeah,
a
that's
pathway
so good.
people really use, right? And then if they're not there, your move shouldn't be to make them go there. That's the wrong idea.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Just go where they are and market the heck out of them there. And anyway, I could give you examples from us and clients in that regard, but like, broadly speaking, but that, yeah, you got me on a little bit of a stump speech there, but it's
No,
something
I
I
love
feel
it. I
pretty
love that's
passionately about.
yeah, no, that's the things that everybody can talk about, their business to nausea, but to have the things that you're passionate about, that's what I love to speak about. That's why I like podcasting, because it's so informal. But one of the things with this buyer's journey, that and I want you to speak to this, is you like your competitors and understanding, your competitor sales team and what your competitors are doing in their journey. Some people don't even get into they don't even have a buyer's journey, but they don't even know what their competitors are doing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and to that end, there's a phrase we use around here. I say we get hired for pain or opportunity. Pain is your competitors are killing you, you're not selling well, you're not growing well, but it's basically a competitive problem to a large extent. And opportunity is the company that's like making a new market, growing into a new space, new product, whatever. But I bring that up because even though we like to get hired for opportunity more and we do great opportunity oriented research and activities and marketing, most of it's pain. They call us when like competitors are killing them. And they're like, I don't really know how that happened. Why are we losing sales? And I think there's a million factors in it. In the startup community, it's the um, I would refer to it as it's the only us model, right? Or, we are the only, I sometimes say, we are the only that does this. We are the only that does this. And I always feel like, well, if that was really true, how big of a market is there for we are the only, right? I
Yeah, and
mean,
for now.
yeah. I mean, yeah. If your Gartner Magic Quadrant, and that might be too nerdy of a reference for some, so like that you can go look up. That I would recommend. But if your Gartner Magic Quadrant is just you, tongue in cheek, not that they ever make one of just one. Well, I would say you might have different problems, right? At that point, I don't think it's competitor, right? You might have poor product market fit. You may not really have enough of a market. I mean, yes, every once in a while, somebody invents the ability for rockets to land on their tail, right?
Right,
And
right.
we love them for that, right? I mean, I love everything SpaceX does. I'm a kid who grew up born in 1970, and they killed all the cool space program stuff by the time I was 2, right? So I'm looking forward to what's going to happen with these guys. But anyway, I think, yeah, there's a lot of blinders that go in, and a lot of it is hubris. We are the only in the startup land, and in the larger companies, it's just institutional blinders. One of the best examples of that, I think, comes out of a book called Stall Points, which is something I would totally recommend listeners read. It's not nearly as heralded as it should be. It's a fantastic book. I'll give a 30-second snapshot. They did an analysis of the stall points of very well-known companies where they basically, I'm going to summarize it, but it's kind of like significant revenue and profit growth stopped and they never achieved it again. They have a slightly more mathematical definition they went for it, but that's basically it. And they analyzed why they stalled. And one of the most significant reasons companies stalled, the large companies, is, and this has always stayed with me, that the company leadership is predominantly composed of people who came and from the management of the originating product or service line of the company. So to use a Microsoft analogy, it would be like a leadership team in the company that, regardless of what teams they're leading, they all came from Windows, right?
That
So
makes sense.
so 25 years later, when things like Linux and Mac gets ascendant for the second time, and there's this thing called mobility, you know what I mean? All these Windows leaders go, well, I don't own a Kindle, and I don't own a Mac, and I'm one of 6 people that use a Windows phone on the planet. And you know what I mean? And they just really do not have any ability to see past the institutional memory they've built up. They just don't. I mean, we're only human. We can only see through so much filtering, right? And anyway, it's one of the things that stood with me for years. And when I one last thing, when I taught in an MBA program for a while, I was fortunate to go in and teach in that environment for a bit. I used to have my students do an exercise every year where they would go out and look at very top name tech companies, and we would count the number of people who came from the founding product line of the company. It was stunning. It was always this heavy amount every single time, whether it was Apple or Microsoft or Oracle or whoever you pick.
That's so interesting. I have never heard of that book, and so I just wrote it down. And I know, speaking of books, and I want to make sure I'm being respectful of your time, Sean, but whenever you look at, and I know, like, you mentioned history, and I thought it was interesting because this whole, 2020, I've been like just reading every book on World War II. I don't know why. I've just been having this, desire to. So I've been going on, eBay or my Kindle and grabbing all these, even older books, from 1940s, 50s, and just reading. And it's so interesting when you take a history book and how much insight you can get from it, and then how it changes. I read a book on the space race, because you're talking about that earlier. And I got so much from it to be able to implement, things that I shouldn't do as a leader, and the holes that were in, you know, um, as Russia was just moving forward, and you look in World War II and you see, well, how did Hitler gain so much control so quickly, and then, what was Churchill saying with, and why was the United States being so hesitant, and then France got taken over in Poland. And it's just like, what's going on here? Why is none of the leaders standing up? They're just trying to have meetings with them, so and then they're ignoring everything that's happening in Poland. And it's so interesting to me, and I'm glad that you said that. If there's some books that you've read besides Stall Points, and I know you mentioned Superboss, is there any other out there that you could give our listeners?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And one thing on history, we we probably could have a whole hour on World War II history because I'm a huge fan of World War II history. But the Rick Atkinson series is a very good one if you haven't read it. That's a really good one. And anything written by Max Hastings is pretty good. And Ian Toll, who just wrote a very good series on the Pacific War. But anyway, that's for a different time. And, well, actually, one other history reference, because you mentioned what you can learn from it. And then I'll bridge into because you mentioned current events. I actually, and then I'll talk about some business books. But in I had a similar experience. I looked at 2020, and I think whatever side of the political aisle you're on, I think America was debating what is a good president. And I said that very generically that way intentionally, right? What is a good president? Not did we have one, right? That's for somebody else's show to decide. Um, and I looked at that because I love to read, and it's my favorite way to learn anything is to go grab a book. And I said, I'm just going to start reading presidential biographies starting from Washington because we're having this huge discussion of what makes a good president.
I love that. Yeah, that's so good.
And I went, and so I'm up to Harrison now, which is a pretty short book since he wasn't really alive all that long in office. And so I'm up to 9 now. But I know me, I'll finish it. And on that front, Thomas Jefferson's The Art of Power was a really good one by John Meacham. That was probably my favorite one of that. But as far as business books go, a slightly older one that I always recommend folks read is Crossing the Chasm. I think that's a really, really good one. A good book to understand marketing from like an analytical standpoint is called The Analytical Marketer. That's a really, really good book, I think. Other ones I would say from a sales side, one I've really liked lately is called Cracking the Sales Management Code, which is
I've heard about that one.
Yeah, that's pretty solid. I like that because a really interesting perspective. We talked about super bosses. Another book called Rebels at Work is quite good, I think. And then, yeah, I mean, there's obviously more I could share. I mean, I'm actually, while we're talking, because it's just you can do this. I'm flipping through my Kindle library that's got 1,100 books in it, and I'm trying to find the ones that I've got all my personal reading in here too. So I'm like, well, they probably don't want to hear about that, but like, there's.
I love this. This is. I'm the same as you. I read constantly. So, so this is awesome. And I know most of my leaders, they're always, that's some of our heaviest clicks on our email that we send out is the books.
I'll tell you one other one before we stop then. So Competing Against Luck by Clayton Christensen. And if somebody's never read Innovator's Dilemma, that's a great additional one to read right next to that one. But those are 2 other really, really good books.
Yeah, I'm reading, and I wish I knew. I don't have it right here, and I don't want to get up off the microphone. But there is a 3-book, and they're big, Lyndon Johnson series, and he won all kinds of awards for it. And I think he wrote it in the 80s, and he won all kinds of awards for it. And you can almost see the disdain for Lyndon Johnson, but the way that he talked about him and that how he came to power, and it is probably, I would say that the Power book with Lyndon B. Johnson, that's probably my favorite book I've ever read.
Okay, that's good. I'll check it out.
I sat there and read the whole thing, and you can see, because I mean, like I said, it doesn't matter whether it was, what political party or anything like that, but just this desire to have power, and how do I get there? And then we can see that in all of us, even reading books, I've read quite a bit of books on Hitler, and it's like, what made a man decide and make these decisions, or Stalin was even worse, what good do they think they're bringing up, that they could kill millions of people? It's these questions, and these books bring these to life. And that's why I think it's so important. And everybody in the tech industry, they always want the latest, greatest book, to find out this futurist said this or that, when a lot of your answers are in history books.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I'll throw one other, because I was scanning while we're talking, but The Hard Thing About Hard Things is another really, really good book. It's all about CEO leadership, written by Ben Horowitz. But Yeah, there's a lot of things reading about history teaches you. I think it teaches you about patterns in the way people behave. It it teaches you how bad people can get, and
Hmm.
gives you a little bit of a benchmark for that, to be honest.
Yes.
And frankly, how evil people can get, and gives you a benchmark, and it tells you how good people can be, in ways that you might not have the same perspective if all you're doing is staring at YouTube and watching whatever the news is feeding you on a given day, right? And it also teaches you geography, which is never a bad skill. You mentioned World War II history. I yes, the map has changed since then, but at the same time, I still can name very obscure countries around the world and know exactly where they are because I read World War II history. And so, yeah, I think there's just a lot of that. And one last thing, and this may seem slightly controversial, but I don't really think it is that, um, yes, society evolves, society moves on, we do better things, but you can look at the soul of people 2,000 years ago and feel, okay, there's some things they did that we do, and there's some things that they do that we don't. And there's things that you learn just by kind of looking into people, and it's probably one of the reasons, um, I also enjoy biographies, because you get a very good sense of not just what that person did, but who they are. Like a well-written biography really tackles both. And yeah, it's I couldn't recommend reading history more highly. And to your point about the Valley, kind of like, oh, hey, there's this great new book on optimizing your funnel. You've got to go read it. And yeah, I do that. Sure, absolutely. But read some other stuff, right?
Yes.
And one last thing on that is like, I just because I always like to throw this in, is like, read stuff you disagree with.
Yes. I was fixing to say
like
that.
like like stuff you really disagree with, like the kind of thing that, like, if you put it on your counter, your wife or partner or significant other would say, you're reading that?
Yeah. What the hell is this?
Right, what is this doing in this house, right? Because
Right.
everybody's house leans a certain way on issues or whatever, right? I mean, or individuals do, if you want to put it that way. But like, um and yeah, if that isn't on your bookshelf, you're really missing out. Like, nobody says you have to agree with that by the time you're done.
Hmm.
Like, no, by no means, right? But you learn so much more by, like, forcing your brain to try to understand. Again, not agree with, but understand, which just means comprehend somebody else's viewpoint. That's how our brains really get bigger. And again, it's not agreement. There's plenty of books and plenty of philosophies and plenty of things that we should not agree with in this world. I have no doubt of that. But that making that step to try to understand is super important. And I honestly, more than most things, that's what's made me a successful business owner, is that I've always kind of injected myself with thoughts and perspectives that I don't necessarily agree with, but I'm happy to try to understand and comprehend as much as I can.
Yeah, I agree. Polarization's never gone well for nations.
Nope.
If you look
Nope.
history.
No, you mentioned Stalin. You mentioned Stalin and the Nazis. For either side there, it didn't go well, and so, yeah, absolutely, and so
Yeah, I
anyway.
love that. Well, Sean, I could talk to you for hours. This has been a great podcast. If somebody wants to follow you, or they want to listen to you, or get a hold of you, what's the best way for them? And then also, if there is a tech company out there and they feel like Cascade Insight's the right fit, what's the best for them to reach out?
Yeah, in terms of contact info, it's just the easiest way is just my email, Sean, SEAN, at cascadeinsights.com. And, or you can go to cascadeinsights.com and contact us through the website. And, as I mentioned earlier, like, as far as who to reach out, if you are, a cloud play, your software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, give us a call. I know we can help you with research and looking at either pain or opportunity, depending on what you're dealing with. And at the same time, we can help you with, activating that research and turning it into some great marketing. And thanks again for having me on the show too.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on the Albuquerque Business Podcast. And thanks to our sponsor, RigbyDigital.com. Make sure to subscribe and share. And go to abqpodcast.com. Get show notes, resources, and links to everything we talked about today to help you navigate your journey as an entrepreneur and business owner.